In September 1854, the most celebrated American ocean liner in history sank in under 5 hours, and not one woman, not one child, survived. We're counting down 10 facts behind the SS Arctic disaster, from a fog-blinded collision and lifeboat failure to crew conduct that scandalized a nation and more than 300 dead. It all began with a government contract and a dangerous bet on speed. In the 10th place, the Collins Line was born from a federal mail contract that turned transatlantic shipping into a matter of national pride and government policy. In 1847, Congress approved an annual subsidy, at times reaching $858,000, to ensure American steamers could match and outpace Britain's Cunard Line. 4 massive wooden sidewheel ships, Atlantic, Pacific, Arctic, and Baltic, were built to carry not just mail, but the hopes of a country eager to prove itself on the world stage. The line's entire business model revolved around speed, with record crossings splashed across headlines and faster voyages sold as proof of American superiority. Before disaster struck, the pressure to win this race was already shaping every decision on board. Number 9. The SS Arctic stood as the crown jewel of American ambition, a ship built not just for transport but for national glory. Launched in 1850 from William H. Brown's New York shipyard, she measured nearly 2,900 gross tons and stretched 284 feet, placing her among the largest vessels in the country. Passengers dined beneath carved woodwork and slept in upholstered berths, surrounded by the comforts of a floating palace. Her record-breaking Atlantic crossings drew headlines and praise, turning the Arctic into a symbol of American confidence. By 1854, her fame was so great that her loss represented more than a maritime accident. It was the shattering of a national showcase. 8th place, the fog off Cape Race, was no surprise to mariners in 1854. About 50 miles south of Newfoundland, the Arctic entered a stretch of ocean notorious for sudden, blinding fogs, where the cold Labrador current collided with warmer Atlantic air. In these waters, visibility could vanish for hours, yet the accepted practice remained unchanged. Maintain full speed, sound the horn, and trust the lookouts. On September 27th, Captain James Luce, with 2 decades of Atlantic crossings behind him, pressed on toward New York at full steam despite the dense haze. The hazard was routine, not mysterious, a calculated risk built into the schedule. The Arctic's journey from luxury liner to disaster began not with a freak of nature, but with a well-known danger that everyone chose to ignore. Number 7. The collision with the Vesta turned a routine hazard into catastrophe. Around noon on September 27, 1854, the French iron-hulled steamer Vesta, weighing just 250 tons, emerged from the fog and struck the Arctic at full speed. From the decks of the Arctic, the damage seemed minimal. Above the waterline, the ship looked intact, while the Vesta appeared to be the one in mortal danger. Acting on this false impression, 3 Arctic crewmen launched a lifeboat to assist the Vesta, unaware that their own vessel had suffered a fatal breach below the waterline. The decision to send help away, instead of preparing for evacuation, cost precious time. This moment marked the point where confusion and misplaced confidence sealed the Arctic's fate. Number 6. The fatal breach in the Arctic's wooden hull exposed a hidden flaw that doomed the ship from the moment of impact. The Vesta's iron prow tore open a gash near the waterline, but from the deck, the damage remained invisible. Water surged into forward compartments, spreading unchecked because the Arctic lacked any watertight bulkheads, a design gap that was standard for American steamships of the era. Captain Luce turned the liner toward Cape Race and ordered the pumps to run, hoping to save both ship and lives, but the sea poured in faster than any pump could manage. Within an hour, the Arctic's fate was sealed. The absence of compartmentalization transformed a survivable collision into a total loss, revealing how confidence in speed and luxury left no margin for error when disaster struck. Number 5. The Arctic's lifeboat capacity exposed a legal standard that was lethal by design. The ship carried 6 lifeboats, enough to save only about 180 people, less than half the number of passengers and crew on board. This shortfall was not a violation. It met the letter of mid-19th century maritime law. No lifeboat drills had ever been held, and no one had been assigned a boarding station. When the order finally came to abandon ship, there was no protocol for loading women or children first. In the chaos, the strongest and most determined took the boats, while the rest were left behind. The law's minimum requirements offered a false sense of security, making an orderly evacuation impossible before the Arctic slipped beneath the Atlantic. Number 4. The collapse of order on the Arctic turned disaster into scandal. As the ship foundered, survivor accounts published in the New York Tribune and New York Times revealed a grim scene. Firemen and sailors forced their way into lifeboats, some even blocking passengers from boarding. Lifeboats were launched half empty, while women and children remained stranded on deck, their pleas ignored in the scramble for survival. No officer stepped in to restore order or enforce any code of evacuation. In the end, the majority of survivors were crew members who had seized the earliest boats. Captain James Luce, refusing a lifeboat, survived only by clinging to the wreckage of a paddle box, a choice that complicates his legacy but does not absolve the institutional failure. The absence of discipline and the abandonment of the most vulnerable left an indelible stain on the Arctic's final hours. Coming to the top 3, the aftermath of the collision delivered a bitter twist. The Vesta, believed to be doomed, did not sink. Despite her bow being crushed and water pouring in, the French steamer's iron hull held together long enough for makeshift repairs at sea. As the Arctic's crew watched the Vesta drift away, many assumed she would be the first to vanish beneath the waves. Instead, the Vesta limped toward Newfoundland and reached St. John's with most of her passengers and crew alive. Meanwhile, the Arctic, larger, more celebrated, and thought to be less damaged, sank in open ocean at about 4:45 p.m. on September 27, 1854, roughly 50 miles from land. The irony is inescapable. The ship that looked certain to survive was lost, while the one thought to be sinking made it safely to port. Number 2. The Arctic's death toll stands as a singular indictment of the era's values. Out of more than 400 people on board, only about 86 survived, and every single survivor was male. Not a single woman or child escaped the sinking. Among those lost were Mary Ann Collins, wife of the company's founder, her son Henry Coit Collins, and her daughter Mary Collins. Their deaths transformed the disaster from a public scandal into a private tragedy for the very family whose ambition had launched the Arctic. The final tally, between 322 and 350 dead, meant that the most vulnerable were left behind in the chaos, their lives sacrificed to a system that offered no protection when it mattered most. The Arctic's sinking became a moral reckoning, exposing the cost of a maritime culture that prized speed, profit, and reputation above human lives. And finally, in first place, the Arctic disaster stands as the blueprint for tragedy that would echo across the Atlantic for generations. In the wake of the sinking, congressional hearings filled the record with outrage and reform proposals, including mandatory lifeboat drills, watertight bulkheads, and a legal duty to put passengers before crew. Yet none of these changes became law. The Collins Line continued sailing under the same flawed standards, losing the SS Pacific just 16 months later with every soul aboard and no wreckage ever found. By 1858, Congress had severed the mail subsidy, and Samuel Cunard's British Line absorbed the market, boasting a safety record American companies could not match. The core failures, insufficient lifeboats, no evacuation protocol, and no enforceable code of conduct, remained unresolved. 58 years later, the world watched as the Titanic, another technological marvel, went down with the same fatal gaps in lifeboat capacity and evacuation discipline. The Arctic's loss was not just a disaster, but an unheeded warning, its lessons paid for in lives and repeated in history. Across all 10 facts, one pattern is unmistakable. The SS Arctic was doomed not by the sea, but by choices: speed over safety, pride over prudence. The disaster exposes how ambition, unchecked, breeds disaster. Every shipwreck since traces back to decisions made long before impact. Subscribe for more true history uncovered.